Hey guys. Work on the pallets continues apace, but Sky has a job and her own projects to deal with, so in the meantime you get more academic discussion. Today I'm going to talk about Final Fantasy VI's translation. The translation of this game had to be done under a pretty major time crunch, and Ted Woolsey was operating under a number of constraints. There was Nintendo of America's very conservative approach to censorship, there were the subtle and not so subtle differences between Japanese and American culture, and there was, of course, the fact that an SNES cartridge doesn't have a hell of a lot of memory room. That last fact, coupled with the fact that the Japanese script was written mostly with kana and the occasional simple kanji, meant that the script had to be pruned ruthlessly to fit it all in the space provided. Honestly, it's a mark of Woolsey's skill that it's as memorable and functional as it is. Warning, this video will contain profanity as usual, but it will also contain minor spoilers. Not for plot, mostly just for items and summons. Let's start with one of those translation issues that really affected the story most. In the SNES version, Setzer expresses reluctance to join, saying that the Empire has made him a wealthy man, only to do an about-face, mostly, it seems, because Celis asked him to. In the original Japanese, and the more accurately translated GBA version, however, he says that the Empire has been bad for business. In fact, in the Japanese, he uses the idiomatic expression shoba agattari, meaning business has dried up. Apparently someone in a hurry could misread that as saying business is up, and thus the SNES translation. Then, of course, we have one of the most classic lines in the game. After being run over by Edgar and company's escaping chocobos, Kefka explains, "Son of a Submariner! They'll pay for this!" The original line is "Kuso, I will repay this favor." Japanese swearing isn't exactly like English swearing. There aren't really tiers of how bad a word is. So translating kuso always depends on context, as it can pretty much mean damn, fuck, shit, or anything in between. In this instance, and given what the translators eventually went with, it's pretty sure the sentiment was something like, son of a bitch. Why they chose Submariner, no one knows. Might refer to the submerged Figaro Castle, might not. The GBA translation changes it to son of a sandworm, which has the advantage of actually being a thing in the game. A lot of the other translation bits of interest really come from name changes, and I'll go through a partial list of those. First, all of the Mughals originally had names that began with Mog. The SNES version, for whatever reason, decided to change that to Ku, mimicking their verbal tic, but it made Mog himself the odd man out. Sabin's original name was Mash, but that was a nickname for Mashius, an actual Spanish name. No relation to the original gurus of Chrono Trigger. Gestal's name was actually Gastra. Terra's parents were Maduin and Madonna, but Tina's were Maelduin and Madeline. Several other espers had their names changed as well, probably due to religious reasons or just because the original was deemed too obscure. The summon Jihad was renamed to Crusader, Quetzal became Pallador, Katobalpos became Shote, a shote is a young pig, Lakshmi became Starlet, Ketshi became Stray, and Valigarmanda ran afoul of the character limits and became Tritalk. The espers themselves were called Genju, a neologism that basically means phantom beast. Chupon is supposed to be Typhon, to go with Orthros, since they're both Greek mythology monsters. In Japanese, his name is rendered Tupon, and as the Greek pronunciation is Typhon, that's actually pretty close. But I can see where a harried translator might go with Chupon. See, T isn't a sound in Japanese, really. Instead, the standard syllable is chi, but when doing foreign words, it's approximated with te plus u. Not to mention it's very easily to slur a tu into a chu, and chu is, as well, a standard Japanese syllable. Pika pika. In the original Japanese, the relic we knew as coin toss was called Heiji's Jite. The jite is a sort of truncheon used as both weapon and badge by the samurai police officials of the Edo period. Zenigata Haji, created by Nomura Kodo, is a fictional detective from the Edo period, known for his use of thrown coins, the old kind with the holes in them, as weapons. Our Haji is named after him, of course. Coin toss turns Setzer's slot ability into GP Rain, which turns your gold into an attack. Makes sense, doesn't it? Several attacks were given new names as well. Kyan's sword tech was originally Deadly Blade, and all of its moves had their names changed as well. They all had names that were very poetic, but not very descriptive, and without room in the game for explanations, they were changed to be more utilitarian. Oh, and the magic missile? Well, in the Japanese, the magic command was written as Maho, whereas the Magitech items also used Mado. Both of these translate to magic, so Magitech was a pretty good workaround on the translator's part. Mado also has the connotation of black magic, so you can see why it was used for the Magitech. All of the playable characters, regular party members, and guests had job class titles in the original. These were omitted from the SNES release, probably to save space. They were reinstated in the GBA and mobile phone versions of the game. Bannon had a job title of his own, and his is kind of interesting. In the original Japanese, he's listed as Shincon, a Shinto priest. That health command you probably spammed for the entire Late River run, that's actually Prey. Also, Wump is named Wild Piglets in the Japanese, so I guess they're just really, really little wild boar? And yes, Tapir's original Japanese name is Baku. Of course, just as Kitsune means both regular fox and fox spirit, Baku can be a normal tapir or the mythological creature that resembles one. Cayenne's wife is Mina and his son is Shun. Elaine is an old French form of Helen. Owain, on the other hand, is Welsh. Those are, of course, their names in English. Both of them appear in Arthurian legend, though, so they were probably picked to add to Cayenne's old knight persona. As for Mr. Thou, oh boy. We've already talked about Cayenne's use of Sesha and Degozaru to give the impression of an old samurai and tough guy, which Woolsey rendered using archaic language, including these and thous. This was pretty badly butchered, much like with Frog in Chrono Trigger. One thing to remember, thee and thou aren't just archaic versions of you. They're actually the singular versions as well as the informal ones. Quick linguistic discretion time. Thou is the nominative version of the word, while thee is the objective. And then there's thy, which is a possessive adjective, but used for words that begin with consonants. Thine is a possessive pronoun, and a possessive adjective for words that begin with vowels. Okay, in the early days of Middle English, thou was simply the singular second-person pronoun. Thou art going to bed early, and both of you can stop snickering about it. Then in came Norman French, which is like a lot of Latin languages, and it had a formality distinction in its second-person pronouns. Tu is informal, whereas vous is formal, which again is why you learned vous in language classes. It comes from Latin's distinction of tu and vos, which were also originally single and plural respectively. But as we know from the royal we, referring to someone in plural is a very strong indicator that they're very powerful, so the plural also became the formal. This became pretty standard in various parts of Europe over the period from the 12th to 16th centuries. The power dynamics get kind of complex over the years and are beyond the scope of this video. Check out the link on screen for more information. So how did thee become seen as formal? 3 reasons. A. Shakespeare did a lot with the contrast of thee and you. B. The King James Version of the Bible jumped on the distinction with both feet because it made a perfect way to distinguish between the singular and plural second-person pronoun in Hebrew. That's part of why, in a lot of languages, one uses the informal pronoun when talking to God. And C, taking from both of those sources, is the tendency for archaic language to sound stuffy and formal, however intimate or rude it might have been in the day. Also, they tended to screw up the verb forms, too. First-person verbs are pretty much unchanged from modern English. I have. Second person gets the est suffix, thou hast, which is havest, elided for ease of speech. And third person gets eth, he hath, haveth. Cayenne actually says I art at one point, which, no, just no. Less of a translation note, but still interesting, are the desperation attacks each character has, that would later be codified into the limit break. Most of them seem to have been translated pretty closely, changed mostly for space reasons, or because somebody was in a hurry and didn't really get the con transliterated just right. Strago. So for all the constraints they had to work with, Ted Woolsey and his team managed to turn out a pretty impressive product, one that's still cited as a lot of people's favorite versions today. The GBA version still keeps a lot of his work in, because, as almost anyone who works in the field can tell you, translation is just as much an art as a science. And whatever else you might say about him, Woolsey was a skilled artist. Still, looking at other translations and original versions can occasionally help make sense of bits of the script that just didn't quite hang together. So I hope you've enjoyed this little digression, and I'll see you guys next time.